All right, so we're back again with episode number 6 of Honestly Though, the podcast show, and I am your host, the one, the only Joel Ramsey, OD, OCD, ADHD, entrepreneur, philanthropist, all the accolades you can think of. Thank you for tuning into another episode where we'll be discussing truth, answering about 200 questions. Don't worry, this video will be split into probably 4 parts that you won't even watch anyways. But if you do watch it, there'll be a surprise at the end of the video. Stick around to see what that is. Alright, there's no surprise. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do, leave a like and a comment and subscribe to my channel. I get in like 50 views, roughly 50 views per video. Like 30 of them is probably me. But, just if you watch them, subscribe to the channel. Yeah, just click that button up there. Just click it, and yeah. So without further ado, let's get right into the show. So we're back. Thank you for sticking around. So we'll be doing 200 questions for skeptics and searchers. And basically it's we all have questions about our existence, whether or not God exists and who Jesus actually was. Unfortunately, many people don't know where to start with a subject like this. They either need to watch 20 long YouTube videos with complicated content or read philosophical or historical books, which are very time consuming to read. This person has put together this document to provide lots of starting points for your own thinking, conversations, and research. The topics covered are by no means exhaustive, but are quite broad and touch on a number of issues. Questions reach us where we are at are useful for dialogue. Questions regarding Jesus start around question number 141, while broader biblical issues start around 121. So those are the question numbers. So the categories covered include existence and consciousness, the universe we're in, is Christianity evil and God hidden, morals, mathematics, logic, transcendent, beauty and truth, more on the mind and consciousness, a look at who Jesus was, and New Testament fidelity. Why am I reading like that? And New Testament reliability. So those will be the topics that we'll cover in this about 4-part series. Existence and consciousness. The first question of today's video is simple, but I guess profound, massive, I don't know. But the first question is, do you exist? And, from time to time I hear people, as well as myself over time, asking that question, I guess, as I said, I don't know if I have said it before, but what I realize a lot of it stems from is postmodern theory about subjectivism and, or especially The Matrix, the movie The Matrix. A lot of that play into why that's a question, or why that's a question that's taken as seriously as it is taken. But the simple answer to that is, of course. We exist, we feel, we see, we experience, and we remember. And that's the basis of existence. So that would be the easiest answer I could give. Do you exist? The question is thrown out to whether you exist. Do you exist? Do you actually think you exist? Why you think you exist? Something to think about, right? So the next one is, why is there something rather than nothing? A weird question, because matter is something, and I don't think you can ever have nothing. You know, on the grand scheme of things, you can't really have nothing on the grand scheme of things, because that nothing is still something. I don't know why you have something rather than nothing, but I guess it's just not logical to have nothing existing. Because to exist is to experience, and nothing can experience, I guess. I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know, but what say you? Why is there something and not nothing? The next question is, what comes from nothing? Nothing can come from nothing. In order to come from something, you have to download. In order to make something, you have to download into the thing that you're making. And so by logic, nothing cannot download something into something. Because that's the creation process. Something of higher intelligence has to beget. Something of less intelligence can beget something of higher intelligence. Which is kind of why evolution, weird. The concept of evolution is a weird concept if you do include God into that evolution process. Because of course evolution is real. Of course, over time things came out of quote unquote nothing. By nothing I mean something lesser. It's just a time period that completely off. The Bible said that the world was created and made. I don't remember what it said. Anyways.
Jesus Christ.
What is your purpose? No, this is a question that I've been bombarded with since late last year. I started to get into red pill content late last year, for probably the last 4 months of last year. And one of the things that made me get drawn into the red pill content was the question of, or the recommendation of men having purpose. Of course, in church, and they tell you, that God have a purpose for your life and stuff like that. But I think it hit differently last year. And, I guess because you're going through stuff, you tend to be more receptive. When you're going through difficulty, you tend to become more receptive to the truth. The truth just sounds that much more palatable to you, or certain truths sound that much more palatable to you when you're going through something. And I think that's what was happening with me last year. And the question of me finding my purpose is stuck with me. And I'm definitely not trying to shake it. I think it's one of the focuses for me. I do fully comprehend what my purpose is. And I know outside of submitting to God, that purpose won't be fully understood. So I guess I would say I'm on a journey to submit to God. Because I realize that it's important to me, sorry if that was loud, but it's important to me to know my purpose. It's extremely important that I familiarize myself with what it is that I was made for and what I can contribute to the world. Because that's the purpose of the podcast, is to help. But, if that's not my purpose, then sure, I'd be doing a good work, encouraging some people to talk and to get help, to pray more, or whatever it is that I might talk about on the podcast. It would be an encouragement. But if that's not my purpose, if the guy that made me, or the entity that made me, that put into me a particular purpose, if I am born with a purpose outside of just being a good person, blah blah blah, then that's what will make me most happy. And I have been seeking happiness. I know that happiness can't be found in the things that you have and the people that you choose to love, stuff like that. Happiness is in fulfilling your purpose, my opinion. And so that's my goal for this year, is to understand my purpose, and then to not just understand it, but to act on that understanding. Yeah, lengthy, but yeah, that's what I think I come to realize or to accept. Do you have intentional states of consciousness? Now, I don't have a clue what that question asking me, so let me just look it up just to verify. It is the very nature of consciousness to be intentional. And consciousness that ceases to be consciousness of something would ipso facto cease to exist. Intentionality in phenomenology, the characteristics of consciousness whereby it is conscious of something. Its directedness towards an object. Wow. I guess I would have intentional states of consciousness because I try to be conscious of how I speak to people. I try to be conscious of how I listen to people. I try to be conscious about how I choose to live my life. I try to be conscious in relation to how I improve my life as well. So yeah, do I have intentional states of consciousness? Yes. If I'm wrong, let me know. And, if you can answer the question, kudos to you. Number 6, why do you have intent and purpose if you come from a purposeless accidental chemical process? Right, that's a question for people that believe that. I definitely don't believe that I come from a accidental, purposeless chemical process. Fundamentally, I think that I don't think I need to go into details. Probably there's a next question where I can answer that. But yeah, definitely not a question that would relate to me. How do immaterial concepts and purposes come from purely accidental material chemicals? And I guess that follow 6 as well. But that's a question for those of you out there that believe that, the Big Bang was just a chance event, or that creation was just a chance event, accidental or whatever. Where these immaterial concepts, because people that tend, and I meet people, and I like to talk to people that believe differently from me. But I've spoken to people and heard them say that speak about this whole accidental creation, but then I ask them about things like thought. Where did thought come from? At what point in the evolutionary timetable did thought come into play? At what point in the evolutionary table did mathematics come into play? These things that aren't tangible, the laws of physics, of whatever laws that exist, where did they come into play? Because for there to be an explosion, there has to be a law that would suggest that if something exploded, blows at this amount of speed or whatever, right? So I like to ask those type of questions. Are your thoughts accidents? So I think I've said it a few times that I think that spirits are thoughts. I think that what we tend to think about can be given to us by spiritual entities. So sometimes something runs across your mind, it might be an inspiration from, whether it be God, or whether it be from some other spirit. You can get a thought from an entity, because thoughts are intangible concepts, and I think that that's what spirit entities, spirit beings are, intangible. And the first place that you will be affected in order to manifest a particular behavior is in your mind. And I think, yeah, that's my thinking. So thoughts cannot be accidental, because there's something pushing it. Whether it be mischievous or whether it be goodwill, there is something behind the thoughts that you have. And I also don't think that thoughts are original, although the question never asked me that. But do you think that thoughts are accidental? That's a question to ponder on your own time. If all that exists is matter, why do people worry about their purpose, mental and spiritual health? Yeah, some people say it is ingrained in us to seek after spiritual things and to go after our purpose. You know, the person that made us would have put that framework, would have embedded that into our makeup. And so even without knowing directly about him, you still have a desire to live a purposeful life, and to believe in something higher than you. I don't fully agree with that notion necessarily. I believe that, because we all came from the same place, the whole Adam and Eve story, or the Tower of Babel story, because we all came from one place, all religions subsequent to creation, or subsequent to the diversification of religions, would have stemmed from one original story, which was God exists. And because it stemmed from that story, or that experience, that knowledge, if you branch off, if you don't believe that, if you say all of us went to school, all of us went to high school, and we learned maths from one school, but then one day somebody throw in there that, hey, this other school teaching maths, and this other school teaching maths, and this other school teaching maths. So 4 new ideas come about. Those 4 ideas still would be based on the first concept of math. And then when people were dispersed all over the world, whether through war or through, just your family getting bigger, so you need to find somewhere new to live or whatever, you would still carry that core belief with you, because that's your foundational story. That's your purpose. Because our foreparents or ancestors knew that, they all moved away and promoted living with a purpose and promoted a belief in a higher power. And so that's one way you could look on why. Yeah, that's one way. Not the correct way, mind you. That's one way you can look on it. If all that exists is matter, why do people worry about their purpose and mental and spiritual health? So I don't believe that all that exists is matter. I believe that before matter was thought, before matter was the immaterial world. And so for people that believe that, that's, as one of the questions before asked, you'd have to answer where those immaterial, intangible concepts come from. At what point were they embedded in the human experience? Because animals do have a understanding of the laws of math, they do have that understanding. Whether it is that they know it or it's just instinctive, they have it. And so you'd have to ask yourself, reasoning, how did we come up with the concept of reasoning? All of those questions you'd have to ask yourself. And yeah, that's sound mad. I already confusing myself with just these however many questions I answer so far. Already so close to where we. Alright, so the next question. Do you trust your mind even if it's a spin-off from an unguided chemical process? Now, that's a good question. A very good question. If we all stem from chaos, then how can you trust the concept of reasoning, the concept of understanding, the concept of knowing? You can't trust those things. You can't trust your experience. And I guess that's why it become a mess for people that believe that, because if you believe that your origin is from disorder, then who cares about objectivity, because there would not be an objective truth. But some lack of trust must take place, because trust is an intangible concept that you have to believe in. You have to believe that all the other systems are sound, because you can't trust. You can't go back and test all the systems. I would suppose if you were to do that, it would take you more than your lifetime to accomplish that fact-checking process, that inspection process. Yeah, it would take you too long. You grow up and you just learn to trust. And I think that concept was what helped me to, for example, for people that question the legitimacy of the Bible. If you question once you question the legitimacy of the Bible, you have to question the legitimacy of any book you've ever written in your entire life. You have to question the legitimacy of any society you've ever lived in. You have to question the legitimacy of any principle you hold to presently. You have to question it. And to question all those concepts is mad. You can't do it. That's where the concept of trust come in. And that's why, even though there are nefarious people that exist, people that in the long run they want to take over the world, or dominate the world and be in charge and whatever, truth is important to them. But yeah, you can't trust your mind. You can't trust anything if you believe in chance. You can't fully trust anything if you believe in chance. So the next question we have looking at now is, if evolution rewounded. I wonder if that's rewounded. If evolution rewounded and started again, do you think you or something similar would exist? Alright, so sure, I think I would still exist. Once God is the person that, or the entity, once God is the entity that is the creator of the evolutionary process, then sure, it would remain the same. And before you attack me for talking about evolution, I don't mean it in the sense of Darwin evolution or whatever. I just mean it on the basis of things evolved. Life evolved from there just being water to space to earth to planets and stars and whatever, to trees, seas, fishes, creatures, human being. So that's an evolutionary process. That's how I use in the term, at least. Yeah, so don't come at me, jeez. Next question. Are you different to a bag of meat comprised of blood, water, and bones, fizzing away to chemical reactions? Definitely different to that, because a bag of meat that doing all of that mumbo jumbo stuff don't have any purpose. And I'm given purpose. I need to figure out what my purpose is, but yeah. So right now I'm just going to give a little reaction to this Jordan Peterson session about understanding the mystery of consciousness. I'm reacting to this because the questions about consciousness are over. So I'm just going to listen to this Jordan Peterson video, hopefully tying to what the questions were and to some of the comments that I was making about the questions that were discussed. Yeah. So let's see how we go. Beep, 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 beep.
And there's something about the world, at least insofar as we're in it as human beings, that is dependent on conscious experience of the world. Now, of course, you can take consciousness out of the world and say, well, if none of us were here, if there was no such thing as consciousness, then the cosmos would continue running the way it is running. But of course, it depends on what exactly you mean by the cosmos when you make a statement like that, because there's something about the subjective experience of reality that gives it reality. Or at least that's one way of looking at it. And since we're all pretty enamored of our own consciousnesses, although they're painful because they define our being, it's not unreasonable to give consciousness a kind of metaphysical primacy. Now, and it's deeper than that, you know.
So I have to restart this video. I have to restart it. Never understand anything that I was talking about, yeah? So if you understand it, you're like a top brains person, right? But I couldn't understand anything. Yeah, so obviously probably if we watch the original video, then it would make sense. But Jordan Peterson have this thing where him like talk a bit extravagantly for the average person. Yeah. But anyways, let's restart it.
And there's something about the world, at least insofar as we're in it as human beings, that is dependent on conscious experience of the world. Now, of course, you can take consciousness out of the world and say, well, if none of us were here, if there was no such thing as consciousness, then the cosmos would continue running the way it is running. But of course, it depends on what exactly you mean by the cosmos when you make a statement like that, because there's something about the subjective experience of reality that gives it reality. Or at least that's one way of looking at it. And since we're all pretty enamored of our own consciousnesses, although they're painful because they define our being, it's not unreasonable to give consciousness a kind of metaphysical primacy. Now, and it's deeper than that, you know, it's a deeper idea than that, because there are physicists, and they're not trivial physicists like John Wheeler, who believes that in some sense consciousness plays a constitutive role in transforming the chaotic potential of being into the actuality of being. And he actually thinks about it, he's not alive anymore, but he actually thought about it as playing a constitutive role, you know. And then from the neurobiological perspective, or from the scientific perspective, it's like consciousness is not something we understand. I don't think we understand it at all. It's something we can't get a handle on with our fundamental materialist philosophy. And I don't know why that is. It's quite frustrating if you're a scientist, but it isn't clear to me that we've made any progress whatsoever in understanding consciousness, even though, well, we've been trying to understand it for hundreds of years, and even though psychologists and neurobiologists and so forth have really put a lot of effort into understanding consciousness from a scientific perspective in the last 50 years. Participated in the process properly, and everyone knows what that means, and no one acts like a mystery has been uttered when you say that. And you know, you can see a situation in your own life that's full of potential. You're often extremely excited when you encounter something that's full of potential, because what you see is something that could be You see a future beckoning for you that could be if only you interacted with it properly. And it activates your nervous system, right, in a very basic way. And we even understand how that happens to the degree that we understand how the nervous system works, because the systems that mediate positive emotion, which are governed roughly by the neurochemical dopamine, and which have their roots way down in the ancient hypothalamus, a very, very archaic and fundamental part of the brain, that responds to potential, which is the possibility of accruing something new and valuable. It responds to potential with active movement forward and engagement. And so we're engaged in the world as potential, and it looks like consciousness does that. And so there's this idea that, and this is the main idea that I think is being put forth in Genesis 1. It's something like, and you see this in mythology, like from what I've been able to gather, there's always three causal elements that make up being at the bottom of world mythology. And one is the formless potential that makes up being once it's interacted with, and to transform it into habitable order. And then there's the idea too, of course, that's deeply embedded in the first chapters of Genesis, which is a staggering idea, you know, and certainly not one that's likely, that human beings were made in the image of God. Both male and female were made in the image of God. And that's, of course, a very difficult thing to understand, partly because the God that's referred to in those chapters has a kind of polytheistic element, although it's an element that's moving rapidly towards a unified monotheism. But it's not also obvious to me why people would come up with that concept, because I don't really think that when we think about each other, we immediately think God-like. You know, the notion that every single human being, regardless of their peculiarities and strangenesses and sins and crimes and all of that, has something divine in them that needs to be regarded with respect, and that plays an integral role, at least an analogous role, in the creation of habitable order out of chaos. That's a magnificent, remarkable, crazy idea. And yet we developed it, and I do firmly believe that it sits at the base of our legal system. I think it is the cornerstone of our legal system. That's the notion that everyone is equal before God, which is, of course, that's such a strange idea. It's very difficult to understand how anybody could have ever come up with that idea, because the manifold differences between people are so obvious and so evident that you could say the natural way of viewing someone is, or human beings, is in this extremely hierarchical manner, where some people are contemptible and easily brushed off as pointless and pathological and without value whatsoever, and all the power accrues to a certain tiny, aristocratic minority at the top. But if you look at the way that the idea of the individual sovereignty developed, it's clear that it unfolded over thousands and perhaps 10,000s of years before it became something firmly fixed in the imagination that each individual had something of transcendent value about them. And man, I tell you, we dispense with that idea at our serious peril. And so, and if you're going to take that idea seriously, then, which you do because you act it out, because otherwise you wouldn't be law-abiding citizens, right? You act that idea out. It's firmly shared by everyone who acts in a civilized manner. The question is, why in the world do you believe it, assuming that you believe what you act out, which I think is a really good way of fundamentally defining belief.
2 seconds later.
So, all right, so that's the sort of idea, is that there's this God of tradition and structure. That's God the Father, who uses the Son, which is more of an active force, and primarily something that's verbal, which I also think is extremely interesting, because it's associated not with thought precisely, but with speech. And I think the reason for that is that there's something to speech that's more than mere thought. And I think part of the reason for that is that speech is a public utterance. And at least in principle, speech is something that's shaped by the existence of everyone else, at least across time. Because when you speak, your speech is put forward in the world as a causal element, and it's also subject to criticism and cooperation.
So yeah, I legit fall asleep a while ago. Yeah. So But with that said, that's part one of a possible four-part episode. The next category that the questions will be taken from is the category of morals. And so we'll have that to discuss next time. Hope you enjoyed this video. Happy that I could have done this with you. And, you know, as I say, you know, leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and share it with your friends. Until next time, thank you for tuning in. And I'm out. I am out. I am so finished.